There we go. Okay, so I talk about the alphabet soup because over the years, the acronyms used to describe prenatal alcohol and meth exposure, and we're going to talk about meth because we know we still don't know enough, but we're going to be talking about meth because a lot of the kids that we're talking about have both or primarily one or the other. But what we know about people in addiction is that no one is a uni drug user. They're poly drug users. They're going to use whatever is available at the time. So a lot of times we see meth, you know, cannabis, alcohol, sometimes some oxy thrown in, you know, there's just usually a combination. So there can be a lot of different things that we're talking about. However, especially here in South Dakota, and I know other areas this is true, but we're really struggling with meth here. And a lot of people who are struggling with alcohol are also struggling with meth. So we will be talking some about what we see with meth and how that impacts. So with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, we used to have fetal alcohol syndrome, and then we would have fetal alcohol effects. Now, we really realize, just like autism and other disorders, there is a huge spectrum of ability that's present in someone who's been prenatally exposed, and the symptoms can run the gamut. So we're going to talk about all of the alphabet soup that you often get when you have a child prenatally exposed that can get confusing at times, and people start talking about all of these and some people go, what does that mean? So tonight we're going to run through that. So fetal alcohol syndrome is where you have the neurocognitive issues. You have at least 2 of the 3 cardinal syndrome or symptoms of FAS. So these are the facial features. When we talk about the facial features, the thing that's important with these are we're looking at the philtrum, which is this little divot in between your nose and your lip. We're looking at the cupid's bow of your lip, and we're also looking at the palpebral fissures of your eyes. So from one end to the other, how big is your eye opening? Now, a lot of people think, why is this important? Because there's a lot of other physical symptoms that can be present. The reason these are the 3 cardinal symptoms is when you guys start as a zygote in your mom's womb, you start out with a brain pan. And your brain pan literally has all of the, we're going to just call them the mama brain cells. These are the pivotal brain cells that are going to replicate over a pregnancy to form a brain. So in the first 7 weeks of gestation, when most people have no idea they're pregnant, you have this lovely brain pan that has those cells that have to replicate to form your brain. If you have alcohol present, alcohol is a solvent, it's going to damage or possibly actually kill off those cells. If you damage them, they cannot replicate as typical cells. If you kill them, they cannot replicate at all. So your brain is amazing, and we're going to talk a lot more about the amazing brain later, but those cells are replicating, damaged or whatever, and your brain starts doing this. So you have 2 beautiful hands. Those of you online, take your hands, put them palm up. As your brain replicates those cells, you're going to take your fingers and fold them in. This is your brain so far. Then you're going to put your fingers together, and you're going to have 2 hemispheres of your brain with your thumbs sticking out. These 2 hemispheres, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, these are your eyes. Your thumbs are your eyes, because your eyes are the only external part of your brain. Now, if you have a very small eye opening, that equals to me that you have very small brain mass, because that's the external part of your brain. So that palpebral fissure is actually telling me about your brain's development. Now, the philtrum also tells me about your brain's development, because the last thing that your brain is going to do is those frontal lobes are actually going to close. And when those do, this lip is open. Anyone who's ever seen a cleft lip and palate, the lip actually starts open. It's going to close, and then these pieces of tissue come down, and they form your philtrum, which also helps form this beautiful cupid's bow. If you have no philtrum, and you have no cupid's bow, I know that your brain didn't fully close exactly the way it should have. So that also gives me information about your brain just by looking at your face. The important thing to remember, though, those happen fast. And if you miss drinking, if you miss exposure during those little windows, you will have none of those features. So I've heard people say, well, FAS is the bad one. Okay, FAS tells me that you have physical features. So I know that there's very specific drinking during the earlier part of the pregnancy. I know that usually, typically between first and second semester or trimester, all of those features have formed. So I know that you drank then. But your brain is developing from approximately 10 days all the way till you're 25, 26 years old. So you can have no physical features and have tremendous impact on the brain. And so I want you to remember that none of these is like the good diagnosis versus the bad diagnosis. They just tell me about when there was exposure. So with FAS, you have to have 2 of the 3 cardinal features. You have to have the neurocognitive stuff going on. You do not have to have confirmation of prenatal drink or of mom drinking. But you have to have ruled out some genetic conditions, because there are some genetic conditions that can have the same facial features. So you want to be making sure that they're looking at that if you don't know that mom was drinking. So partial FAS is a diagnosis that I totally loathe, and I'm going to be super honest, because I've worked with families who say, well, he only has partial FAS. Okay, it's like being partially pregnant. You are or you aren't. Partial FAS just means you have 1 of the 3 cardinal features. You do have confirmation of maternal drinking. You have all of the neurocognitive stuff going on. There's usually some growth deficits showing. But it doesn't tell you that they're less impacted. It just means they have less physical features. Then we have alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. This is the new fetal alcohol effects. People decided fetal alcohol effects was too confusing. So to help all of you really understand it, it's alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, because that rolls right off your tongue, and it's easy to say. No, I'm sorry. It's true that someone decided FAE was too confusing, and they renamed it, and I just still go, really? Like, this is not something that's easy for people to say. But what you're saying is, we have all of the neurodevelopmental stuff going on. We know mom was drinking. There's no cardinal physical features going on, but this child has been impacted. And so it's basically just saying we know there's no physical findings, but we see the brain impact, and we know mom was drinking. Any questions so far? Okay, the next one, ARBD, is alcohol-related birth defects. Now, we talk about the brain a lot in this class. We're going to talk about the brain a lot. However, alcohol is a solvent. A solvent kills developing cells, any developing cells. This is where you can see children and adults, just people, who have significant damage to other parts of their body. It can be your bones. It can be liver, kidneys, heart, stomach, intestines. Anything in your body can be impacted. This is recognizing that there are birth defects present. We know they're not from a genetic condition, and we know that there was alcohol present, so we're able to say this birth defect is alcohol related. Usually, but not always, usually those children are impacted heavily enough that they're going to already have an FAS diagnosis, but not always. So, and I don't see a lot of doctors honestly diagnosing ARBD, but it's out there. So you might see kids that have it. I see a lot of kids who have it. I see very few with the diagnosis, I guess I should say. Neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. So this is where we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that prenatal alcohol exposure is the redheaded stepchild that nobody wants. The medical world, if you can't put a diagnostic code to something, it does not exist. So in the medical world, the Connors is kind of or the ICDC is the whole, like, how you bill. There is a very small code that says like prenatal alcohol exposure. And then people said, well, but there's also a mental health component. So we need something in the DSM-5 that says that, in fact, there are mental health components to FASD. There was a huge fight about that because they're like, no, it's a medical issue. No, it's a mental health issue. You know, both sides kind of say, well, you should own it. No, you should own it. The fact is it's both. And we need to be able to say that it's both. There's mental health effects, absolutely. And there's also medical. So this was proposed. It's in the very back of the DSM-5 as a condition under consideration, possibly for the DSM-6 that'll come out in 6 to 10 years. So right now it is not actually a diagnosable code. Which is dumb, sorry. Some other terms you might see, static encephalopathy, alcohol exposed, is kind of the chicken's way out of saying they're FAS. This is a doctor saying static encephalopathy means brain damage. So they're saying because this baby was alcohol exposed, they have brain damage. Sounds
worse to me.
Yeah, it's such a lovely term. Anyway, and I did put fetal alcohol exposure. You may see that still on some people's diagnoses, but it's not actually recognized anymore. I mean, most kids are being diagnosed ARND. So, all right. I really wish my clicker would work. These are the cardinal features that I went over, just so you kind of have a picture and can look at it later. There are actually quite a few other things that you can find. There's different things about rib cage, toes, hands, but the ones that are really important to remember would be the short palpable fissures, the thin upper lip, and the indistinct philtrum. I put this in here just for you guys for a reference. This is the diagnostic criteria that we utilize. I don't expect any of you to diagnose your own children, so it's just there for reference. And I can email this to everyone so that they have it for their own use for later. I put this up here because it is very hard, even when a child has all of the facial characteristics, to just recognize it. If you look at these 4 faces, they do not look the same. However, if you were to measure them utilizing the scales that are used for diagnosing fetal alcohol syndrome, they all measure the same. But racially, there's differences in them, and so when you look at them, you don't see the same condition. You know, I live in an area where we predominantly have Native American children that I had seen being diagnosed, and so one of my first foster children was a little Caucasian girl who was adorable, and I remember going to genetics, and we walked in, and he's like, oh yeah, she's got all the features, and I'm like, no, she doesn't. And then he whipped out this picture, and I went, oh yeah, if she had blonde hair, that's her. But, you know, I had only ever seen that picture, so I did not recognize it, and at the time I worked in a medical position. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not like you can just walk around and see it. And sometimes as a parent, you wish you could, because a lot of people make judgments about our kids based on their behaviors. We do, because we can't see what's really going on. And that's one of the things that we hope to kind of work on over these 6 weeks, is helping us and others recognize what's going on in their brains. Because the one thing to remember is this is a physical disability with behavioral symptoms. We see the behaviors. We don't get to see what's going on in here. So that's what I really hope we all take away from this, is that this is a physical disability. I talked already about the fact that the brain, if you look, I mean, the brain is starting to develop from the very beginning, and it goes all the way through. So even if we can get someone to stop or lessen their drinking somewhere along this line, we're gonna help the outcomes. But the fact is that the brain is getting hit every time someone drinks. This is extreme, but I use this slide because I've done these classes now for almost 10 years. And I think I used to do a lot less anatomy and brain science because I realized I was a geek and I was the only one that really loved that part of it. But what I realized is if you don't understand the effects on the brain, we still look at it as they're choosing to do this, not their brain is not able to do this. So these are both 6-week-old infants. Their brain's on necropsy. This is a slide from Dr. Sterling Claren. The brain on the left is a very well-developed and super healthy child's brain. Okay. If you look at the color, there is really good blood flow to this brain. This child died, I believe it was a heart condition. It had nothing to do with this brain. This brain has great volume. If you look at all the delineation, there's lots of area here. There's 2 very distinct halves to this brain. Then you look at the brain on the right. The color is terrible. There's no blood flow to this brain. The volume is significantly less than this brain. I'd say at least half. There's not 2 distinct hemispheres, and there's very little delineation. So this brain has significant volume loss. I'm gonna guess there's a lot of glial cells, which we're gonna talk about later, because remember when I said if cells die, they can't be replicated? Our brain is amazing. It makes new cells that can't think and they don't work, but they're filler. So, and there's also almost no blood flow to that. If your brain is not getting proper blood flow, what do we know? It can't work. This child very much probably died due to the significant losses in that brain. And that goes back to remembering our kids' brains are different, even if it's not that extreme. So here's where I'm going to talk about filler cells. See, I think this is funny, and I've been told it's not. But glial cells, they cannot think. They cannot conduct any energy across them, none. So they're there because our bodies are truly amazing, and we will survive no matter what. So your brain makes all these glial cells, and it fills in holes, because people are like, well, why can't we just do an MRI and see these holes in their brain? You probably don't have holes in your brain, because your brain is going to keep its structure, and it's very gelatinous, so it needs to have everything in there to keep its structure. So it makes glial cells, but they are literally fluff. Information can get to one side of a bunch of glial cells, and it's stuck. It can't get across them. So sometimes we're giving a message to a person who's prenatally affected, and it's like that message goes to the edge of the Grand Canyon, and it's trying to yell across the Grand Canyon. And if the wind is exactly right, it might get across, and they actually do what you asked them to do. And then other times, they're yelling and yelling, and there's no one on the other side to pick it up, and so then they can't, because that message has not been conducted through that brain. So this is important because our brains are amazing. Dr. Hoyme, who is an expert in the field of prenatal exposure, he's a geneticist, dysmorphologist who has done studies all over the world. He talks about the superhighway may not have been formed. There may be a ton of glial cells there, so it just didn't form. But what we know is with the proper intervention and the best team working with this kid, and you're part of that team, you can build a country road. And that country road can enable that message to get through. But we have to be giving the same message. So if you tell the child to take out the trash and you tell the child to take out the garbage, that's 2 separate messages. You're building 2 separate roads. So if the people at school are giving another message, you have 3 roads. If the caseworker is giving another message, you have 4 roads. You're not going to get very far because you're all building separately. That's where we have to get people to work as a team, because if we're going to help these kids be successful, we have to be building the same road. Otherwise, we might accidentally be tearing up the other person's road without realizing it. Are there any questions, comments? Yes, Shelley.
So how many times do do they figure that you have to tell them the same thing that maybe hit a country road? Because I mean that keeps you thinking, yeah, I should keep parenting.
Oh yeah, and you're going to keep parenting forever.
Right.
Because you may tell them 5 million times, and then that country road may be awesome, and then they have a rainstorm and there are huge potholes and you have to start over. And that is honestly true.
But they can.
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But they can.
Yes.
Okay.
And Deb is probably biting her lips right now. So I need to really quickly tell you that we are so lucky because Deb Evenson's joining us. Deb Evenson is one of the probably most world-renowned speakers, I think, on FASD and education. She's been doing this for 35 years and worked all over, including Japan, and she's amazing. So I'm sitting here being nervous because I'm like, oh my gosh, she probably knows more than me. No, so I'm like, anyway, I love Deb. But so
Nora, this is Deb. I just have to say, I'm taking notes. I just have to tell you, you're saying some things I've never heard in that way. So
right.
I'm honored to. I'm enjoying this, and I'm taking notes. So I'm just part of your class. Thank you for letting me hang out.
Well, hang out anytime. So I remember when I was first learning about FASD, I was like reading all of Deb's books and stuff. So anyway, so we're going to talk about specific brain injuries. Now, there's a lot of parts of your brain. We're not going to talk about all of them because while I loved anatomy and spent years in it because it was my favorite thing, I know not all of you feel the same, but we need to know why. We need to understand what's broken in order to fix it. So we really need to look at what in the brain. And I want to tell you, if anyone called my kids damaged, I'd kill them. I'm going to use the word damaged tonight, not because I think your child is damaged, but because the brain has been damaged. And I always talk about they think differently and they look at things differently and they're differently abled. I do use the word damaged tonight just to really drive home the brain has been highly affected. So I do not believe your child or any child is damaged. I just think there is brain damage. So the injuries to the brain that are really important to look at are the frontal lobes, the corpus callosum, the hippocampus, the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, and the hypothalamus. There will be a graded quiz. No, I'm kidding. Take good note. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. Everyone just walked out. What the heck? No, I'm just kidding. Check who's still online. No. So when we talk about the frontal lobes, these are the things that they're responsible for. They're actually responsible for a lot more, but these are the things we need to worry about. Movement, decision-making, problem solving, planning, impulse control, and memory. Okay, so movement. How many have kids that you worry you're going to be turned in to DSS because they run into everything? They are constantly bruised. They struggle with like spatial awareness. Super clumsy. I have one daughter who the pediatrician tells everyone I have recommended bubble wrap at all times. She called me today and said, did you see the picture of my leg? She's bruised from here to here. And I said, I did. And she goes, I thought I could jump a fence. I'm like, really? Did you really think you could jump a fence? She's 18 now. And anyway, it's still. So she has an appointment with the orthopedist tomorrow because she has a hairline fracture now. Yes.
Isn't her hair blonde?
Yes, it is. But that's, I know. Dr. Anderson brings in like students. He's like, and here is Rachel. Yeah. Thank God he knows me. I don't know. Anyway. Okay, so decision making. This is where we think about things and we weigh our options. We think, should I go in and tell my boss to screw off today? No, I really need a job. I really know that that's not the best decision, even though I'm frustrated. We process, okay? A lot of people with prenatal exposure can't see the end result. So decision making is hard, yes.
Can you build a dirt road across that one?
Kind of, yes. But that comes to impulse control that can be hard.
Okay.
Yes. Because I have worked with a lot of kids who, and this is so painful to watch. I worked with a little boy, you guys, in a school, and he was trying so hard. But the one thing I can tell you is the less understood they are, the anxiety level goes up. As the anxiety level goes up, their impulse control goes down. So if we can help bring anxiety down, they're less impulsive. This is where when behaviors increase, it's because things are not right in their world. If we can help them make things right, you will see those behaviors decrease. So impulse control can be huge. A little boy that I worked with, you would watch him. He would do something and then you'd see where his brain caught up and he would just crumble. It was like, oh my God, I did it again. You know, and I loved it because the one place we got with him finally was the teacher going, oh my God, he doesn't know he did it till he did it. And I'm like, thank you. And as she started recognizing that and trying to kind of be proactive with him, he was less impulsive because she finally went, he's not a violent kid, because he was punching kids at times. And then we found that it was totally impulsive, and trying to help create an environment where he was safer and there was a lot less judgment, his impulsivity did go down. And so you would watch him start to do something that's like, oh yeah. So yes, you can build that dirt road and you can definitely create, and we're going to talk a lot about, we are raised in a behavioral modification world. If they do A, you do B, and then C will be the outcome. We're big into consequences. When you're talking about prenatally exposed children, we need to look at environmental modification. How can we look at their behaviors, recognize what might be going on, change this environment so that they don't have this problem? So you guys become detectives. When behaviors are happening, there's a reason. That's their only way of telling you things aren't okay. And I get a lot of people who go, so you mean no consequences? No, we're going to talk about that. But what I mean is we can help them learn those dirt road techniques by recognizing that we can make some of the changes that are needed more than they can. So impulse control is always huge. I have never met a child who was prenatally exposed that didn't have impulse control issues. Especially, like I said, as anxiety goes up, impulse control goes down drastically. How many people have ever been in a situation where you're very uncomfortable and you find yourself kind of being reactive to the situation, like you just react in ways you wouldn't normally react? Our kids have even less control over that than we do. Okay, so memory. Memory, ouch. Memory is so interesting, and we're going to talk a lot about memory eventually, but memory is so many more things than just remembering what I just said. Kids can often say the rule, like, what did I tell you? You told me not to throw my pudding at my sister. And then they throw their pudding at the sister again, okay? Being able to remember a rule and verbally regurgitate it to you does not mean that their brain has understood how to actually act on it. So we're going to talk a lot about that because I get a lot of caretakers and people who work with prenatally exposed individuals who are so frustrated because they're like, they can tell me exactly what they're supposed to do. Okay, that is one part of the brain. That message still has to travel through the brain, across the Grand Canyon at times, for them to be able to use that message. So if I have given a message to a prenatally exposed person, I say, okay, Shelly, you're my person right now. So I would say to Shelly, I need you to take the pins and put them in the cup over there. What did I say to you?
Take the pens and put them in the cup over there.
Okay, can you tell me in your own words what that means?
Yeah, put them away.
Okay, can you show me? Okay, if she can't do all three steps, it doesn't matter what I said to her. Because a lot of our kids have echolalia. So they may be able to say, you said, and I mean, I have kids who can even imitate my voice. And so they sound just like me. And it's like, yes, I did say exactly that. But that doesn't mean their brain did anything with that. It recorded it, but it didn't make the word mean anything. So just because you can read doesn't mean you understand the content. All of those things are different parts of the brain. You have to have them be able to replicate what you've asked for it to mean anything. Does that make sense? Okay. So the corpus callosum is so important, and only old people will understand the way we used to understand it or talk about it, because we talked about it as the telephone receiver of the brain. Young kids are like, what are you even talking about? I'm like, we used to have phones that were hooked to the wall. I'm sorry. Anyway, so now we call it the subway of the brain, but basically it's your switchboard. It is where information comes into the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is going to decide where does it need to go. So if I send it to China instead of to your math center, it's not going to do you a lot of good. It is so important because this is what facilitates communication between the two hemispheres of your brain. Now, the problem is with exposure, prenatal exposure to alcohol and/or drugs, you can really damage the corpus callosum. We've seen children with significant damage to their corpus callosum. So in picture A, you have this wonderful telephone receiver. For those of us who remember that telephone. I actually had one that I took to trainings for a while, but a lot of kids are like, oh, anyway. So picture B, if you look at this is actually a little overdeveloped right here where it's wider, but then this part is smushed. This is partial agenesis of the corpus callosum, or partially missing corpus callosum, because there's part of it that's really damaged and not formed. Now, if you look at picture C, there is no corpus callosum. This child has what we would call agenesis of the corpus callosum, which means that it's not there. This is huge, which means that the two hemispheres of your brain have zero ability to cooperate or to communicate. Some days my mouth works. These kids will actually not be able to take their hand and cross the midline of their body. So you're talking about an inability to send information anywhere it needs to go. These children are usually very impacted. So you're talking about kind of the lower end of ability of the spectrum. Not kind of, the lower end of the, yeah. Feel free to get up, move around, do whatever you need to do. So the hippocampus, I need to really make sure you read this, is critical for the formation of factual memories. Not memories, factual memories. If you have damage to the hippocampus, your brain may store the memory in pieces that don't make sense. So when I say, what just happened? You look at me and you give this rendition of what just happened that never happened, and I have no idea where you got it. And it's probably pieces of things that have happened over the day that have become jumbled and formed a memory. Now, when I say, stop lying to me, tell me what just happened. If your brain has stored this jumbled mess, can you give me the factual account of what just happened? No. No, and you're not lying. You're not, because it's real. Your brain has told you, this is your memory. This is the reality of your memory. So this is where I tell parents, stop asking. If you already know, because I have a lot of parents who are like, I need them to tell me the truth. And I'm like, but they're telling you their truth. They may not be able to tell you what you need them to tell you because they may not even remember it that way. Am I saying they never lie? No, everyone lies. Like, kids are kids, we're humans, we all at times have told a lie. However, the need to make kids be honest is innate in us. When you think about being a parent, one of your jobs is what? To have your kids grow up and be honest, functioning people. We need to reword that. because we cannot force them to remember something that isn't even in their brain bank as a memory. What you're going to do is cause a ton of anxiety between you and your child. And you're trying to meet a need for yourself, not really, this is where I'm like, do you have to know that? Like, do you have to know that they just broke that dish when you know they broke that dish? It's one of those things where you're like, you know what, the dish got broken, here's what we have to do. We're gonna need to clean the dish up. I need you to help. We're gonna have to buy a new dish. What can we do together to buy a new dish? So if they broke the dish on purpose, we're dealing with breaking the dish. If they don't even know they broke the dish, you're dealing with the broken dish. Sometimes we don't have to know those things. We can still be teaching good skills. We can also still be teaching pathways to honesty and talking about, boy, if this dish got broken by somebody and they told me they broke the dish, like we could just talk about it. So then if they are lying, they might come forward to you, but you're not doing the, tell me the truth, how did the dish get broken? And you get in this battle that you cannot win. Does that make sense?
If you approach it that way, the anxiety level goes up.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get the results. But,
How many people have ever done that? Until somebody tells me who broke the dish, we're not eating. All of my kids are like, I did it, I'm hungry. Okay, did that solve anything? No. That didn't help anybody, because I have like literally 12 kids being like, I totally was the one. I did it on purpose. I need macaroni. No, I'm sorry. So, we need to look at how can we help teach, because discipline means teaching. Punishment is punitive. It's just somebody's got to pay. We want to teach. This is also your gateway for the memories to gain permanent storage. These are permanently stored memories, so if they are stored faulty, they will never not be stored faulty. You can't argue them into fact, by the way, so I've tried. Great, my wisdom just no. Okay, so faulty memories that are stored permanently can never be stored like as the factual things of what happened. If they were stored faulty, you can't argue them into being right. Okay.
You can't argue them into changing it
No.
to what you know it was, whether it's true or not.
This is where there's actually a ton of research about like people who witness a crime. You can have 10 people witness the same crime, be standing in the same room witnessing it. The cortisol that goes into your brain, the way that you store that memory that you've permanently stored, you could tell me that the guy was 6'4". She could say it was a girl who was 5 feet tall. That is truly what you've stored, what you think happened. I can't force you to change that, because when you remember that crime, that is always the way you're going to remember that crime. That's why actually eyewitness testimony is like super unreliable and shouldn't even be used. And there's reasons, because there's lots of chemicals, but anyway, we don't need to know that for tonight. So, okay, so your basal ganglia, movement changes, increased muscle tone, muscle spasms, and rigidity. Children who've been prenatally exposed have a fairly high number of kids who have like cerebral palsy type issues because of damage to the basal ganglia. You can also see there's memory loss associated with damage there. There's problems finding words, aphasia, which is like someone who's had a stroke, and you can watch them and they're trying to say something and they cannot get the right word to come out. Sometimes our kids will have this problem where they're trying to tell you something, but the word that's coming out is not right. You can see tremors, tics, just like somebody who has Tourette's. There can be tics, and walking difficulties. So this is mainly going to be associated with kind of physical disability issues. However, the memory loss and problem finding words can be significant for just learning disabilities. Any questions so far? Because I'm hitting you with a lot of information really fast. Okay, your cerebellum. So here's your brainstem. Your cerebellum is like this little thing that hangs off the back of your brain. How many people have heard of sensory processing disorder? Okay, we're going to talk more about it, I think, in week 3. It's in your itinerary. But the important thing is, right now, wherever you're sitting, your brain is taking in everything from your surroundings. If the lights are making noise, the temperature, how your clothes feel on your body, your skin is picking things up, every part of you is picking up sensory information. Your brain is flipping through that going, you don't need to worry about that, you don't need to worry about that. So it's not paying attention to a lot of it. Hopefully it's paying attention to me. I'm important. No, I'm just and the information that we're getting. But it's filtering all the time, okay? The problem if you have damage to your cerebellum is it can't filter sometimes. So you have kids that are literally inundated constantly with their environment. The way their clothes feel, the temperature, the way the chair feels, they're hearing the lights. And so their brain is saying all of this is important. And then at the end of the day, when you say, what did you do in school? And they're like, nothing. And you're like, no, you did something. What did you do? Nothing. Okay, they may not remember a lot of the day because they are so overwhelmed all the time that their brain hasn't been able to really process a lot of things. This is where, and we're going to talk a lot about environment being so important, because if you're overdosing that sensory system and you just have it on overload all the time, they cannot function and learn. But the other thing that you're going to see behaviorally is how many people have seen a kid who comes home from school and explodes. Like you say hello and they're like, wah! And you're like, oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. They have probably held it together in school all day because they don't want to look different. So they're like, I can make it, I can make it, I can make it. And then they get out of school and they get home and you talk to them and that system is done. And then you tell the school and they're like, well, it must be something at home because they were fine here. Okay, and it's not. This is where we have to realize that everything kind of adds up. It's so important that we look at the sensory system, and that's why we really spend a lot of time on it later. Voluntary movement also has a lot to do with your spinal cord and just really interacting with the other parts of your brain. So damage to your cerebellum can really impact how the brain communicates also. Okay, the hypothalamus, body temperature, emotions. Body temperature, we have kids that are prenatally exposed that cannot regulate their own body temperature. If they're out in the sun too long, they will have a very high fever and have physical symptoms. This can be extremely dangerous. They can also get too cold and not be able to pull themselves back up to where they should be. This can be extremely dangerous. These are kids that really need to be aware of their environmental temperatures because that's not good for you. Yes.
What about kids that just, would that be the explanation of a kid that don't seem to feel cold? They'll go
Yes.
out with shorts and 10-degree weather and play all day?
Yeah.
I mean, is that kind of the...
Yes, we can also, like, it's more your brainstem that's going to do that, but yes. A lot of our kids will not feel, okay, so I have a daughter who doesn't feel pain. She's the one that's hurt all the time. Mm-hmm. This can be very problematic. You learn from pain. You learn not to do certain things because they hurt. And so we go, yeah, we shouldn't get into scalding water. It hurts. We will get out of scalding water. This is the person who would stay in scalding water and boil themselves to death. They would also be out at 40 degrees below in shorts and die because they don't know that they're that cold. And actually, we had a death in Rapid City of an FASD person who went out into a blizzard without proper clothes, and he died as an adult. So yeah, absolutely. Emotions. Okay. I have a regulator on my emotions. I have this nice switch. Things happen and I'm able to go, bring it down, go back to that good zone, come back to 0. So, bad things happen and I'm able to work through them. And I'm able to say, okay, I'm going to wait till I get home to blow up. I'm not going to blow up now. I won't cry. Okay, we can do that because we have really healthy hypothalamuses. Oftentimes, the kids that we have, the adults that we're working with, whoever who's been prenatally exposed, they don't have that. This is where rages, which are so different than a temper tantrum, can happen, you know, just going off on things. Or you can have kids that have a seemingly no emotion. You know, I have people who are like, they have no remorse. It's not necessarily they don't have remorse. It's that, can they feel that emotion? Do they understand what sad is? Do they understand what happy is? They may not. So emotions are regulated in the hypothalamus. Growth, salt and water balance, which we don't really need to worry about too much, although if it's off, you can be very sick. Sleep, okay? Our kids are the oversleepers or they don't sleep. There's kind of this, you know, they may need a ton of sleep or they just never sleep. If your child is having sleep problems, that does not mean that they do not need sleep. That means that you need to get help, because you cannot grow if you don't go into REM for at least 4 hours a night. You also become super, super crazy. It is not good for you. That is not a medical term, but it is true that you cannot in any way. I mean, you know, there's been studies on people who don't sleep literally losing their mind, and they will help you lose yours if they're not sleeping, because our kids need supervision. I went into the doctor with a little one and I sat and cried and said, if you care about me at all, you will help me with some sort of sleep meds, because he sleeps 2 hours a night, maybe. And I cannot safely, and I realized the night that I woke up and he was pouring bath water and he was 3 years old, and I was so tired I hadn't heard him until I heard him actually trying to get in the bath. I'm like, this is dangerous. You have to help me. And they finally went, oh, we didn't know it was that bad. I'd been in for, I was like, okay, because I've cried in here before, but you didn't think that was bad. Anyway, you know, I had one person actually say, well, maybe he doesn't need sleep. I'm like, are you serious? Everyone needs sleep. And I went back and went, thank you. He is so much nicer. I am actually sane. So this is wonderful. We need energy to be able to really be good parents. Make sure you're communicating. If your child is not sleeping, you do need help. And a lot of these kids, they need medication to help them sleep. Their brain will not let them. Weight and appetite. How many people have had a child who was failure to thrive? And the doctor says no child will starve themselves. No neurotypical child will starve themselves. A child with a prenatally exposed brain who has damage to their hypothalamus will die. They will, because they do not even know they're hungry. They don't understand they need food. And here's the other thing, Dr. Ed Riley did a study with prenatally exposed children and nutritional needs. What he discovered is that often they need up to 4 times the calories of a typical person, because their brain is working that much harder than yours. They are running a marathon all day long. You have to have fuel to run a marathon. I got called into a school. I got called into a kindergarten class, and it was an emergency. They had to implement a code word to evacuate the room because this child was so dangerous that he was harming other children and had destroyed the room. So I'm going in, and I'm going in blind, and I walk into this room, and first of all, I'm like, oh my gosh, the teacher, he went to my classes. I know him. He's raising kids with FASD. I'm thinking, okay. And I'm like, wow, this classroom's set up great. Like, okay. And then I see this giant kindergartner, and I'm like, there he is. Oh my God, that's him. Yeah. And the teacher goes over, and there's this child who maybe weighed 20 pounds with like really Coke bottle glasses. And he's like, and I'm like, that's the Tasmanian devil that you guys are evacuating the school for? And I thought, okay, so yeah. So I'm sitting observing, and the first day I watched him, and he's going, and he's doing his work, and you could watch his body just get tighter and tighter and tighter, and he exploded. And he took that room out. And I thought, holy crap, okay. I've seen it. I know you're not crazy, because the teacher's looking at me like, and I'm like, yep, okay. You're not overreacting. Wow. So the second day I'm watching and I'm taking notes, thinking, okay, not seeing patterns. And the third day, as I'm watching him, I'm like, wait a minute, timing. It's the same time every day. And my stomach's rumbling because I can smell lunch cooking, and I'm thinking, I didn't have breakfast. Oh my God, I'm so hungry. And I'm watching him get more and more agitated. I'm like, he's hungry. So I went into this meeting with all the school personnel and the liaison officer. And by the way, this grandma had already told me what was wrong. She knew. She was so smart. I love her. Anyway, and I said, he needs a snack. And they all went, are you joking? That's what you want us to do? You want us to feed him? And I said, yep, you need to give him a snack. You should probably add one in the afternoon too. And I kind of got asked to leave. And you could tell that the principal was like, who asked her to come here? Like, seriously? So no one called me. So 2 days later, I called and said, how are things going? And they're like, fine. He's doing great. The problem is they don't recognize their body's signals. So he couldn't say, oh my gosh, I need a snack. You know, there was the comment of, you want me to give him a granola bar? I'm like, no, actually something with protein. But anyway, hunger and the need for fuel can really break down things. So really and honestly, you want these kids to have 3 meals a day and 3 snacks, and they need to be really protein-based, and the less sugar you give them, the better. Yes.
I'll tell you my story.
Yes.
My twins are 16 now, and they were at Stevens, 9th graders last year, and I got a call that Sean got escorted with a tiny little liaison officer out of the learning center to the principal's office because he was acting up. And he just stood up and walked. It was kind of funny because he's now about 5'11" and 240 pounds now. He's grown so much in this past year. And I said, like I had talked with you, he needs food and he needs a lot of food. He's on Concerta. So by the time probably noon, he was eating. And then by 2 o'clock, which when he was acting up, he was already out of food. He was totally out of food. And his sister's a diabetic who was in the same classroom at that time and always had a little bit of snack in her bag. So I had to just say, he needs to eat as soon as he gets in that classroom. And he was fine. And now he's even bigger.
Well, and here's, you know, a lot of
He
times.
doesn't get violent. He just was, he
Yep.
wasn't doing anything.
Well, and he's not thinking. He's not thinking and learning. You know, this is the problem. A lot of times they're like, well, it's not a huge behavioral issue. They're not like, you know, the classroom's not having to be evacuated. And I'm like, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And if we really want kids to learn and be able to process, we need to be fueling the body. And I've had a lot of schools who are like, well, we don't let other kids have snacks. You know, and your comment is right. Maybe you should. And the other thing is, I don't care. And I'm like, I don't care. If this kid needs that, we should be looking at what this kid needs. And, you know, so that, honestly, kids need snacks. They're growing. But it's just one of those fights that sometimes we have to go in and say, it's funny because sometimes you have to have a professional say they have to have a snack before they'll believe it. And what's funny is I am a professional, but when I go to my kids' classes, I have to have a different professional come because I'm just the mom. So yeah. Any other questions about that? Yes. Yes, because see, this is really one of those things with our kids. They're often either one or the other. Like they eat all the time or they will never eat. I have he's not little, he's 17 now. My son Dante has a feeding tube. He was very failure to thrive. He eats now all the time. I mean, like so much that I'm like, we just had his doctor's appointment and we had stopped supplementing formula through his G tube. And in 6 months, he lost 30 pounds. And right after the doctor's appointment, we went to Pizza Ranch. He ate 8 plates full. And I'm watching him going, and he's losing weight. Yes.
Well, last time Morgan was at our house, we went to Papa Murphy's and got pizza, and
Hmm.
that little thing ate 3 pieces, and she was
And
still
she's
hungry.
tiny. Yep.
So what do?
You need to feed them. They need to eat. They do. I mean,
So don't just give it to her.
yeah. Well, it depends. Now, it depends if they don't have a shut-off switch. Because some kids will eat until they vomit and be very, very sick because they don't. So with those kids, what I would do is you need to look at what should they be eating, give them 3 good meals, 3 snacks, but cut them off. Because I have worked with kids who will literally eat and get super, super sick, and then they would keep eating. It's almost like they have Prader-Willis syndrome where the brain is not able to tell them you need to stop.
Well, even like at breakfast, she had bacon and eggs and pancakes.
And I forgot Morgan is one that I've worked with who she has to have someone else help her stop because she will make herself sick. Yeah, because I do, and that's the problem. It can be feast or famine. You had something you wanted to add, Rich?
I was gonna add that that's a provided IEP.
Mm-hmm.
To fight for that snack.
And you guys, it's funny, people don't think they should fight for something like that on your IEP. You should.
Definitely. And in Adam's case, chewing gum.
Mm-hmm. Because that's a sensory thing.
That we fought for.
Yeah.
To get it on there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we, our one son that we just did an IEP with, sugar, I could see the sugar crashes and, one class he'd sleep through and then after lunch he was a terror. And it's like, no more sugar. And we're going through the IEP and the gal in charge of it's like, yeah, he really, really responds good to snacks and he really likes candy bars and, and they just kept
Beef
going.
jerky. Yeah.
Finally, one
Yeah.
of the other teachers says, are you not hearing? He said no more sugar.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, I did. But it's like, it didn't register.
Does that mean you don't want me to give him candy bars? Yeah, there's times you're like, are you listening? Yeah, yeah.
I literally went and bought the school. I said, I don't care. I'll go buy snacks. If I have to buy snacks for the whole class, I don't care as long as that's what he gets.
Yeah.
It's and we actually cut out an after school program because all they did is sugar. And it's a culturally appropriate program and I don't care because it's all sugar. And how do I find that balance?
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. How many people have ever known someone who struggled with addiction? Okay. What happens when they're trying to be quote unquote clean? What do they crave? Sugar. Like bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our kids, and we'll watch a film where Morgan Redmond Fawcett is talking, and he's an adult who has fetal alcohol syndrome. And he will talk about, he's been an addict since he was born because his brain was formed soaked in alcohol, wanting these things. Our kids will crave sugar, but just like a diabetic, a lot of times you crave the things that you should not have. Because I have a lot of people argue with me, but they want sugar, they crave it so bad. I'm like, yes, they do. That does not mean they should have it. Yes.
So when I got candy laying around, I should put that away when she's there because
She
sees it and she's right there.
I have one that I have a locker with a lock. And I put things in it. Guess what one of the things that goes in my locker with the lock? The bag of sugar. Because I have kids that will literally sit. I got up one night and I had a child scooping scoops of sugar into her mouth as fast as, and I'm like, that is disgusting. I have another one that if he can get the sugar bag, he will pour it into a glass of water and drink it. They do crave sugar. And it, that is not, but they do not need it. You should not.
You're feeding the beast.
Yeah.
If you do.
Yeah.
I have a comment regarding
Yes.
what you're talking about with value. My 3 birth kids, they would go through, they would eat, they just would eat and eat and eat and eat. You couldn't fill them up. And then they grew and then they didn't want it. So
The problem with Morgan is she's never gotten out of it. Yeah. So, okay. So we got through the hypothalamus. Uh-oh, now it froze again. Yep, I went like 6 slides, didn't I? No, I didn't. Okay. Okay. So everyone get out your paper. The test is not, no. Okay, no. You must pass to advance to class. No. no one would ever come back. Like, seriously, that would be the end. Does everyone, I mean, we went so fast through like basic brain anatomy. Does everyone feel okay about what we talked about? And the other thing, you guys, especially like people online, if you have questions that you haven't felt like you could ask here, please email them and I will respond. And if you guys have questions later, you can email or call or whatever. Everyone's packet has my card in it. Why do we worry about the brain? What does it mean? Okay, it means that we have behaviors. We do not have this wonderful like viewing scope into their brain to understand what's going on, but we do have the behaviors. And honestly, those are our clues. It definitely changes ability, okay? This doesn't mean that they are disabled. It means that they're differently abled. Everyone with prenatal exposure can do really mainly whatever they want to do. Now, there are times that we have to look at it a little bit, like, is that safe? But it just means that they may need help and support. And we talk about, instead of striving for independence, we strive for interdependence, where they feel comfortable asking for and receiving help as adults. Because I'm going to be honest here, 97% of people with prenatal exposure will not live totally independently. That does not mean that they all need the workshop or that they have to live in your basement forever. That means that they will need someone who will help them with certain things. That may be their partner, that may be a roommate, that may be someone who checks in once a day, once a week, whatever, but they're gonna need support. So we strive for interdependence. It's the rare individual that can completely be independent. And that's okay. And I think understanding that right away and helping them feel okay, and that does not mean they're less than, really helps your outcome over time. The other thing it means, though, is intent. And I don't like this analogy really, because it's not that they can't. So we use can't
All right,
versus
wait a
won't.
minute, I'm in class.
You know, this is where people have said can't versus won't. And I think we need to look at might not be able to without support versus they're just choosing not to do it. The other thing that's important is strategy. We might have to change the strategy we're using to help them, because the strategy, if you're using a strategy and it's not working, to continue using it is kind of pointless for everyone. And it causes a lot of stress. So we're almost out of time, but I want to say, okay, if you guys went to work every single day and you were in trouble from the minute you got into your job until you left, and not one person would tell you why you were in trouble, at what point would you become violent, out of control, super nasty, hopeless, just quit, walk out, throw things, whatever? I'm a redhead, it would take probably 2 hours. But, you know, other people are more patient, they might last a week. That's our kids. We often put them in environments where they are in trouble all the time because they're not doing it right, but we're not providing them with the tools to do it right. Dr. Jaime will talk about where we've asked them to dig a hole and we gave them a fork. We have to give them a spoon, or better yet, let's give them a shovel. Because if we don't, they're not going to be able to dig that hole. But we dig a hole and throw them in quite often with the things we're doing. The other thing, though, is reality. You do have to look at it like, okay, my child is most likely not going to just move out at 18 and be fine. Although, honestly, I know a lot of people with neurotypical kids, and that isn't really the outcome a lot of times anyway. So it's just the reality of a lot of our kids need more time. They actually say if you can keep them a little more structured and in your home until 26, there's going to be even better outcomes because their brains really aren't ready until 26 to be out on their own. But you know, honestly, we now know that your brain isn't done developing till then, so none of us should have probably been out on our own making decisions at 18. Outcomes might be different. You know, like I talk a lot about having to kind of give up the dream of being a grandma in the typical sense, because for a lot of my children, that's not necessarily the best idea. So outcomes might be different. We're going to talk a lot more about strategies and things to do about it as we go along. The other thing I want to say is 101 is a lot of information, some strategies. We do have a 201 where we're all interventions and strategies. So 101, we give a lot more information. But I will be giving you tools. We don't have enough time to give everything. Are there any questions since we're basically out of time? Well, I hope you all come back for next week because I won't be giving you a test. Yeah. And like I said, if there's any questions or anything, just let me know.